We're going to call to order sort of a double workshop here on the DES program and also strategic planning. I do want to apologize for the folks that were here on time because we had a little bit of a conflict because Dr. Paulson has a value adjustment board meeting and literally they can't do their work if everybody's not there to vote on it. So I think he'll be here real soon, and of course I appreciate, all board members appreciate having materials in advance, so I think he's probably very well prepared, very well versed in what's going to happen. I do want to ask a favor of my colleagues on the board in that what I'd like to do as the presentations are given, other than quick questions for clarification, I'd like to see if we can let the presentation continue. Please make notes of what you'd like to ask and whom you'd like to ask it, and then we will have an opportunity for public comment. After that opportunity, we will have our board discussion. So I'd like to see if we can avoid a full back and forth during the presentation, but there certainly is all the time in the world for a robust back and forth after we have all the information, and that would be from the presenters and then from any members of the public. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome Assistant Superintendent Purvis for the DES presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members, Superintendent Clark. On behalf of the Human Resources Division, we're going to present today on drop and post-drop information. And you all have a copy in front of you as well. So let's talk about what the FRS drop is. It's a program where you retire as you continue to work. Most of us are aware of this. Monthly retirement benefits remain in a trust fund with FRS. They earn an interest of 1.3% and tax deferred as long as the employee participates in the drop. Back in 2011, this multiplier decreased from 6.5 to 1.3, which is effective today for us. And the maximum is 5 years of participation in drop, except instructional. For instructional personnel, they may begin drop at any time after reaching 30 years of age. They may receive up to 3 years of extension with approval from the principal and the superintendent. So again, that's a total of 8 years. Teachers must apply for FRS drop extension each year. And again, they must have board, superintendent, and principal approval. Again, if they're a teacher that's come in as a second career, they obviously don't have to do 30 years. You can enter it at 62, or you can work for 40 years.
Just
yes, sir.
Quick correction, 30 years of service, not 30 yes. years of age.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
30 years of service.
I would have retired much earlier.
30 years of service, yes, sir. For instructional, they maintain their regular salaries during drop and drop extension. And in 2016, the board approved where they paid the difference between the FRS drop rate and the regular class rate. Teachers may complete the school year in which they end their drop or drop extension. We put an example. If instructional personnel drop was up in February, they can complete the school year under drop. And again, there is no age deadline for instructional employees. Non-instructional, they must enter the drop at 57 if they have 30 years of service. They may defer if they have 30 years of service and they are not 57. But the bottom line is, for non-instructional, it's 30 years of service or the age of 62, whichever comes first. They must retire on the date their drop ends. They have 5 years and there are no drop extensions for non-instructional employees. For administrative, must enter drop at 57 if they have 30 years of service. They may defer, again, So again, they are on 30 years of service or age 62, whichever comes first. Administrative personnel may extend to the end of the school year, but there are no drop extensions. The number of current employees we have in drop as of February 28th. We have 258 employees, which is about 5% of the total number of employees we have. You can see 14 administrators, 132 instructional, and 112 non-instructional employees. What are the restrictions? They must remain retired for 6 calendar months and collect retirement funds. They cannot work for an FRS agency. During the 7th through 12th months, you may not receive both a salary and retirement. What does that mean? We tell them the best option is sit out an entire year. We don't want to make any mistakes where somebody could possibly lose their retirement and/or we could be liable for repayment. So they need to sit out one entire year. The value to our employees, obviously, as you all are aware, they are vested in the community and culture of schools and departments, serving critical shortage areas, critical shortage for teachers and high-need schools, and just as we are now, teachers in all subject areas, of administrators to remain some stability in schools, institutional knowledge of ESPs and professional technical employees, and maintaining that experience and continuity is critical at each of our schools during this time frame. Again, we're retaining those experts that know the subject matter. They have a higher level skill set. They're a resource for training and support. They're key to the effective operation and equity in our schools and departments, maintaining that diversity. Give an example of people that we're hiring. We have hired external candidates. This year we hired 45 external employees from the age of 57 to 70 years of age, and that's all across all types of employees. Let's talk about the bridge for 1 year. So after that 5 years, or if it's 8 years for instructional, the year you must sit out, we have a bridge, and we use DES of Florida. Provides retiree an option to work for DES while continuing to serve Alachua County Public Schools. And that is during that 1 year of service, okay? They would continue to receive their retirement funds, and midpoint on the salary schedule, they can work without interruption. All retirees, I think are important to say, it's paid at midpoint. And here are our current DES employees by the numbers. We have 2 administrators, 4 ESPs, and we have 1 teacher under DES right now. Here are some other districts that are using DES for instructional and non-instructional support personnel. There are other type companies like DES in the state. This is just a company that we use, and you can see who they're representing. A little bit about the post-retirement employment history from 2006 to 2012. Post-drop was for administrators only. During that time frame, they maintained their current salary while in DES, returned to ACPS employment at their regular salary, and no limit to employment once they return to Alachua County Public Schools. Beginning in 2012 to 2015, the board adopted post-drop DES for non-instructional. They maintained their current salary while in DES, and they returned to the midpoint, step 15. 2016, instructional personnel were included in the post-drop. A teacher recommended for a DES enters at the midpoint, step 13. Upon completion of DES, or after the year in DES they serve, we advertise the position. If it is determined that the post-DES employee is the best candidate, we rehire them at the equivalent of step 13 or midpoint. Administrators and non-instructional personnel, they come back at midpoint, step 15, and then we advertise and hire the best candidate at that point after the year. Here are the numbers by the years from the inception of post-drop. So as a whole, from 2006 to 2019, we have had 57 participants in DES, the post-drop year. That is an average of 4 per year. Procedures for DES. The supervisor recommends DES for an employee deemed essential to the operation of a school or department. For DES, we're only putting our best qualified applicant and employee in DES. Supervisor forwards a justification for a DS for the employee to Human Resources. It is approved. An HR supervisor will meet to review DES guidelines and procedures with the employee. They sign the contract. We go for board approval. Once it's approved through the board, DES comes and meets with that employee to review their employment contract. We did want to add one little statement. There's 2 groups that are currently not eligible to work post-drop under DES. That is bus drivers and bus aides due to liability, okay, and workers' comp. It's too high a cost for them. We searched around with other companies that provide the same, and no one was covering either of those 2 groups. The markup for DES, it goes by your hourly pay range. And we look back at the historical, we've never been charged above the 29.5. And we gave a sample cost to the district. So school board employee, $4,000 with retirement, Social Security insurance, early retirement. And terminal pay, $53,166.98. DES employee, $51,800 with the 29.5% markup. Average savings, $1,366.90. That is our quick presentation. I know I go through fast.
Thank you very much. And before we continue, I just wanted to give a very sincere thank you to all of our staff that are here. I know when you have to stop and get a workshop ready, a lot of other things get put on hold for a little bit, but this is very important and crucial information that board members need. But I wanted to make sure you know that everybody on the dais appreciates your professionalism and your willingness to help us with the information to make the best decisions we can. Now, at this point, just on the subject of the post-drop DES, do I have any members of the public that would like to speak only to that subject? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go ahead with board member discussion and start with Dr. Paulson.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you. Good job on that. This has been an issue that we have been involved with at least since I've been on the board. And I've changed as time went on how I felt. So I'd like to go back with a little bit of history because I think it was said that, you know, we're stuck with what the previous board gave us or something like that. It's, we stayed, back when, this goes way back, newspaper, I looked at the newspaper, one Aaron Jester said we were looking at drop and DES particularly because I had a concern that we were wasting money on people with high salaries because at the time a person making $95,000 made $95,000, came back, got hired, and they're at the top of the salary schedule. And most places weren't doing that. So at the time, Aaron Jester, in an article, the Alachua County School Board is again asking the school district to pare down 2 programs that allow school employees to collect the salary and retirement benefits simultaneously. Employees hired back in the district post-DES before 2011, which you did write that. I think you said before 12. Will continue to receive full pay this school year, but will return to the midpoint of the salary schedule next year. That's what I ran on, putting people back to the midpoint. Mrs. Roy remembers that. Because I thought we wasted $750,000 to $1 million. which was a lot of money.
Sir.
So we did that. I said, we need to end this, it's killing us financially, and in leadership development, which I heard somebody say that before. That came up in our mind too. We want to vote on it and get it behind us. That's from me and Eileen Roy. But I've changed my position. What happened was the superintendent, Dr. Roberts, went along with us. He changed his position when it was hard to hire people and keep good people. That's why I wanted to know that I've changed how I feel about this, because he asked us to do that. So that's when we went ahead, and I've got some things here, and made the rules that you were quoting. And if you guys can use this on this board, these are a synopsis that we gave to Erin Jester so she could write it in the newspaper. But I want to make everybody understand, Dr. Roberts wanted to end it. Dr. Roberts wanted to start it again. And that's a fact. 3, 4. And there are some people, thank God he did, because there's some people that are very valuable that we still have. And I don't want to see us lose those people. And as long as I don't see people, I think since we put people at the midpoint. There's some districts that put people at the beginning salary schedule. But I think I talked to you, Mr. Purvis, that it would make it difficult for us to keep even these people. And I want to make your job easier, not harder. So if you look at, here's a brief synopsis. All employees, and another thing you got to understand, the only people we had DES was the administrators. Our ASPs were left out in the cold. They couldn't get extended drop either. Only teachers could get extended drop. And considering I was president of the teacher union, I didn't want to see any of our employees get treated badly. So that's why all this has been done. All employees can go through drop. Only teachers are eligible for extension up to 8 years. Starting with 09-10 school year, any teacher hired back after finishing extended drop will be placed at the midpoint of the instructional salary schedule, step 13. Now, the only thing is you guys moved them up the salary schedule. My fault for not saying that I didn't want that to happen, but, hey, so sorry. So, too bad, too sad, I should have known better if I wanted that. So but that's good. They're good people. In June 2012, we adopted the following proceeding concerning DES. All non-instructional personnel will be able to apply for DES. That was new, which up until this date, only administrators were allowed to participate. The changes to DES were as follows. The employee would work for DES of Florida, which I'm just going to repeating things to let people know this has been a big issue with the school board. The 4 of us that have been here for a while. With DS and receive the salary they had when they finished drop, often at the top. They would also draw their retirement. After 1 year, they could work for the district for 2 more years only and would be hired back at the midpoint of their present salary, whichever is lower. They would still be drawing their retirement. Their employment is terminated after the 3rd year. That we changed. That we changed because it was vital. Just like you say in the paper, 4,000 people applying, 500 now. We better wake up and realize that you're facing that situation. Since DES was instituted starting February 2006, employees were drawing retirement and often working for salaries exceeding $90,000. We wanted to see how much we could have saved if these employees were paid at the midpoint for the last 8 years. I say $750,000 to $1 million. Why? Letting administrators stay employed without a definite termination date at that time thought stifled development of young administrators. I agreed. Now I realize that that's something we need to keep some of our most valued employees. Issue brought up at superintendent forum. Fairness, people going into DES now work at the midpoint. Teachers have been doing this for 5 years after extended drop. That's why I thought it wasn't fair. We had teachers, they came, if you finish with extended drop, you had to come back at the midpoint, but they were the only ones coming back at the midpoint. So then we made it fair for everybody. For 2 years, while people employed by DES and brought back continue to work without an any date to pay the top of salary schedule. Also, employees such as ESPs could not apply for DES. Our ESPs could. Now they can. before 2012, why administrators could. That has changed. Fiscal responsibility, how much has it cost the district to employ these administrators at the top of the salary schedule instead of putting the midpoint years ago. We've looked at that because we're good stewards, all of us, of our money. Remember, they received their drop payment, also received their payment at this time. The money saved could have been spent on people on the front line, such as, God help me, I know bonuses, I'm sorry about that, differentiated pay, etc. How much can we save if we employ people next year running DS under the pre-212 rules and midpoint salary? But again, I want to stress, if there are people that went past the 2 years, it's because we needed them. I agree with that now. But to think that we didn't think this was a problem, obviously, was a misstatement. So I think that's important.
Okay.
Let me see if I got anything else. I know I'm talking, I'm sorry.
Hey, you're good.
It's all right, it's all important.
I want to stress that the superintendent asked for this. He changed his mind too. The superintendent talked to these employees, came to us as a board. We had a workshop. 4 of us were in that workshop. We all agreed. In fact, Dr. McNeely and Mr. Hyatt, from the get-go, I got a quote for them from one of the minutes, saying we should look at particular situations and people. Maybe that's a paraphrase, Mr. Hyatt, correct me, but I think that was, I know which, it might have been the 113, January 13th, 2015 workshop, DES workshop, suggested incentive plan for critical areas. Mr. Hyatt and Dr. McNeely. So that, we know how they felt. I've come around to their way of thinking. You guys were right, you two. So that's, I think that needs to be said. Other things we did, like I said, I hope we can, this dialogue, I'm glad we're starting it. Salaries for employees first. I'm not against hiring people back, again, like I said. We also proposed the language now using for DES. We benefit from having some of our most valuable people brought back. What is wrong if that few people have benefited financially to the detriment of others, employees, students? Yes, teachers have benefited extended drop. This gives them an extra 3 years of drop, and our teachers in this county certainly haven't been paid well while they were working. But I see no problem having them pay the extra cost at the time. This is another thing we put in, incurs with the retirement system, because when you're in drop, your retirement cost goes up from at that time, 6.95% to 12.8%. After all, they are making as much as $100,000 because they're getting their retirement. But, you know, these are people that put in the time and serve this district well. And finally, I'm going to say, and I'll look back so I don't take too much more time, I never was totally against DES, but now I had serious concerns about its implementation. But this, we have a good plan. I'm not just guessing at it. I don't guess at it. I told you before, I don't guess at things. I got them. But I know what happened, and I think DES, I would still vote to keep certain employees. And I think, like you said, how many did you say, 6 people? Mm-hmm.
Right, yes, sir.
Well, and I've got the December 15th, 2000, I got 7. And anybody wants anything else, I'm sure I can look that up for you. And I spent all weekend looking at this stuff because I really, it got to me when people said we just inherited this from this board. This board put hours and hours and hours into this subject, hours. And I think we've come up with a good plan. I think our staff has done a good job with this presentation. The people we kept are very good people. We don't need to embarrass them either. And I say we continue to keep them. I know who they are. I'm not going to mention them because it's not the job to mention that in public. None of us should mention those things in public. So, you got anything else? Just ask me. I'll go and look at my files.
Okay, thank you, Dr.
I'm
Paulson.
almost like Jenny Peck, aren't I?
Dr. McNeely.
Thank you. We had a discussion last week, remember, on transportation.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm wondering 2 things. The mechanics that we discussed, they are eligible, but then employees are asking, how are they eligible when they too have to have a CDL and they drive buses? That's one question. And then the second part to that, to me, those employees are very much vulnerable to everything that we're trying to do for all of the other employees in the district. Is it any way that staff could figure out what is it, since DES or no other firm or agency like DES will pick those employees up? I'd certainly like to have some type of consideration for them as well if we are continuing with the DES procedure.
I can answer the question about the mechanic if you want me to.
Yes, sir.
So the mechanic, the primary responsibility is not to drive a bus like the bus drivers and riding the bus as bus aides.
But they have to test them,
yes, ma'am, at times.
And drive them.
Right. And what the companies like DES do is they look at the workers' comp rate and the liability, and that's why they have made it as a company that they do not support having those employees.
I get that.
Yes, ma'am.
But I want the board to understand, as well as other members of this staff to understand, as well as the public, if this is going to be aired or videoed. It's very difficult for me to understand why, not understand. I get what you're saying, yes, about the liability and the cost factor, but I cannot see us totally leaving them out in maybe our own post-drop, and that's crazy because the state has to get into that. But I just hate, and I want to be on record to say that they are, to me, the most vulnerable employees in our district, and because of the stipulation of DES and other agencies, they are not eligible. And I'd certainly like for us to consider, I don't know what that would be, but something.
Thank you, Dr. McNeely. Ms. Certain.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Purvis, for the information that you gathered here for us, and I appreciate you bringing it forward to us and us having a discussion despite it being handled in the past. So I'm glad that being new here, we're able to have this discussion. I had a couple questions and would like to make the statement that I have no problem with the DROP program overall. Before I became a board member, being a taxpayer of this city, the county, and the state of Florida, issues of this nature, although I'm just one person, they do impact me. And I felt like this was an issue before I came here with me on the board for me. When an employee signs up for DROP, I went to the Florida Retirement Systems website, and some questions that were posed there were the employee should carefully consider if they are ready to retire from working. Have they considered their finances, insurance, other investments, and things of that nature? Because when you sign up for DROP, you know for sure that 60 months later, 5 years, however you want to say it, you're going to be ending your employment. So I'm wondering if as a district, because we, as a board member, I get a packet with our agenda that comes tomorrow. It shows us employees that sign up to enter the DROP program. As part of the HR process and the transitioning out, is there a procedure where there's a transition process or program or protocol that's put into place when an employee signs up for DROP?
There is, and if I may, I'll bring Ms. Finley up, and she is our DROP extraordinaire, and she can answer the procedure process for you.
Once they finish DROP, is that your question? What happens after?
No, the transition plan we have these critical employees.
Yes.
So say we have an employee, and I think we have wonderful employees in the district. This is nothing personal with anyone, with an employee. These are taxpayer dollars, and I'm just asking for us to be accountable for the taxpayer. So when someone signs up for DROP, and they're entering the DROP program, and they're at their work site and they have 60 months, is there some type of plan put into place to cross-train another employee, to look out in the district to say if we establish pools of employee for people who are interested in transition? This is non-instructional, because we already know the instructional, they have a different set of rules and they're not held to this. Is there just something like to look out amongst us to say we want to have an upward mobility program for our currently hired employees? Or are we looking to say this is a position that we know if we go to the public, advertise to the public, we're not going to have a problem with filling? So we don't have to worry about that. I mean, is there like a plan put in place so that when that person gets to the end of their drop, we don't have to entertain DES?
I can say that each department and schools on non-instructional, they are aware there is cross-training going on. I would also say that even with cross-training going on, even with non-instructional, we still have a deficit of employees. So the school system is a little different in that we need all of our employees. Now, we can cross-train, but even in the cross-training, when we're ready to hire, the principals are going to put that job out, they're going to post, and they're going to still try to hire the best employees. So your question of, is there cross-training going on? Absolutely. But the question you didn't ask me is, do we really need these employees to stay and train as long as we can? They can. The answer would be yes.
That's the transition plan. That would be
Yes.
part of, even be a cross-training, be as overfill. Is that
have
similar to an
cross-training.
overfill?
Absolutely.
That's what I would call an overfill. So I guess that was one of my questions that I had, is that do we have a plan for that? Because we don't want to end up and be 60 days out or 2 weeks out from the person leaving and then saying, oh snap, we got to do something because they're leaving and we haven't done anything.
Well, within each department, there is cross-training.
Okay. So I guess my recommendation would be if someone comes, if we know we have an employee going in the drop, that be one thing that their manager or supervisor have in place. What's the transition plan at the start of the drop? That's one of my questions. Thank you, Ms. Finley. And then the other question that I had, I'm sorry, I marked it. You mentioned, Mr. Purvis, in your work, in your presentation here, the resources and training for supporting. You said the key to effective operation and equity in our schools. Can you tell me how this impacts equity of retaining the employee extending the drop through DES? Can you tell me? Because I couldn't figure that out.
Right, so obviously impacting equity is keeping employees employed that are all underrepresented groups. In particular, we have talked immensely about the struggle we're having hiring African-American teachers, and we're talking instructional, and all other underrepresented groups. And if we can go ahead and keep employees that are highly effective and have the institutional knowledge and experience, then that's just going to help our diversity factor when we're hiring. And that's what we're trying to do. And when we cross-train, we're doing the same thing within schools. I'm not saying we're cross-training specifically for our diverse applicant, but we talk to our supervisors about cross-training all your employees within your department, and diversity is a piece of that, so we can promote everybody that's of quality within the system.
So was that looked at when you were looking at the statistics of the employees who have participated in drop and those who've been rehired as under the DES contract and extended? Did you look at the racial and
Yes, ma'am.
sex?
Yes, ma'am. I don't have that information here, but yes, we did that. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then there was the statement that I read in here that after they finish the DES, that there is an application period that goes, yes, that the position goes out, yes, to be applied. So to me, that just kind of seems a little futile, because if you're going to advertise a position and you're going to say I guess my question, how many times is a position advertised and filled with a non-DES extended employee?
That's a great question. I couldn't answer this as you asked today, but I can find out the answer for that.
Okay. Because it seems like an external person would be already at a disadvantage because of the person, if they're competing against the person who currently hires a job, there would be no learning curve or whatever. So, and I already asked that question here. So I want to be on record as saying As I said in the meeting 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have questioned the position, the DES contract, had it been instructional, because I know that you all have communicated with us at the issue of recruiting, hiring, and retaining instructional staff. The point that I was making, and I think it's the point that's made on the Florida Retirement System's website, is if we have a time that we know an employee is going to separate from us because they've entered the drop, they've signed a paper that says 60 months from now my employment will end, I think we know that's going to happen. And so to come and to say we're going to do this as a workaround so that they don't, it's double dipping. That's what it is. Nobody wants to say that, but I'll go on record as saying it. I'll stand with that, because that's exactly what it is. We're giving employees a means of receiving their retirement benefits as well as getting a paycheck and continuing to work. And I just think, as being taxpayers and with the current climate for taxes in the current legislature and all, we have to be mindful of that and the decisions that we make. Coming back at the midpoint was a very good move, I think, so that you aren't paying out maximum dollars to people after they've already worked their salary. And I'm not against anyone earning a fair salary for fair pay, but I just think we have to make sure that when we have these types of programs in place and we're allowing people to kind of take the back door to skirt the spirit of the law, we have to be careful of that, and how that looks. People will feel that that's exactly what it is. It's a backdoor way of being able to game the system. And that's my concern. I'm not against us. I think it's a good program. The DROP program is a very good program to allow folks who may not have been able to save in the earlier working years to accumulate a nest egg, but to have the excuse or to say that folks are not ready to retire, they need insurance, or that we don't value them because of the service they got. And those are all, I don't think those are all, those are not good statements or good stances that I could vote for. So, but I thank you. I may have one other question. It seems like I do. I just can't find it. I may come back if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, you're always welcome to come back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Roy.
Thank you. Just to kind of clarify, when we first started the DES program, a lot of people saw this interest at 6.5. Also, people were afraid that it wasn't going to last. If we don't get in right now, we'll never get this opportunity again. So a lot of people, when you say they weren't thinking 5 years ahead, and at 5 years they'd have to leave, they were thinking, I better take advantage of this because I may never have this opportunity again. So a lot of people came in, and as Gunnar said, we had a lot of angst about, precisely what Mrs. Certain said, and that people were taking advantage, and they ought to know that if they signed a paper saying it was going to be 5 years, by God, it's going to be 5 years, And, but, people's lives change in a 5-year period. All kinds of things happen that may, there may be a financial, medical, something that would, encourage them to work a little bit longer to pay off that medical bill or something. And so people have different, reasons why they might want to work longer than 5 years. And as everybody has said, we needed employees, so we created the extended drop period, which was saved this district. Okay, and then once the earned interest dropped from 6.5 to 1.3, there was less interest in going into drop for teachers, because teachers can work as long as they want. They can work 40 years before they enter drop. So there were not as many people going into drop, so the worry on the board's part kind of diminished, because there weren't these emergency situations. I got to work another year or two. Please, let me work another year or two. So that's kind of why we have fewer employees are entering drop. So just to make that. And as far as ESPs being offered DES, I mean, everyone else in the system got offered DES, but we're going to, except for bus drivers, and that's not our fault. But everybody else got a chance to work a little longer. So why would we want to exclude somebody who is an excellent employee? Obviously, they wouldn't be recommended if they weren't an excellent employee. It just doesn't, I mean, this district has always been, or tried to be, as fair to all classes of employees, in terms of getting the same raise and getting the same benefits. So to deny an ESP that's an excellent employee, that's coming back at midpoint of the salary, seems like a really good deal for the district. So that's kind of why the district extended it to DESE. And I think it was Gunner's, Dr. Paulson's suggestion that we go to the midpoint, and that saved us hundreds and thousands of dollars for doing that. One question I had about this percentage markup, DES, I understand that even with this percentage markup, the district still comes out ahead, which is clear on the next page. But I just puzzled at home when I was looking at this. What is the percentage markup? Is that what they charge?
Yes.
The district?
Yes.
That's what they charge the district?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I mean, I didn't know what it meant. All right. Okay. But in spite of that, they still come out ahead. And then the other question, I saw that the number, and I think Mr. Hyatt said this at the last meeting, the number of employees that we have at DES is minuscule, 6 employees, I think. Yeah, these pages aren't numbered, so I can't say where it is. But the bridge for 1 year, where it says we have 4 educational support personnel, that would have been the person, that applied for the data entry or something, the last board meeting. Is professional technical included in ESPs?
They're separate ESPs and then professional tech. Yes.
So we don't have any PTs in?
Not right now, not right now.
Correct. So that's a category, but we don't have anybody in it.
That's correct.
I get it. Okay, I wondered about that. Okay, I think that's all I have, but I might have more later.
Thank you. I see a couple of other lights on, but since I haven't weighed in, I'm going to take a turn and then get back to some of my colleagues. First of all, I think that some of this is a matter of trust. And I think the superintendent has to trust the principals and the department heads that they're going to make judicious use of this. And I think that they do. If you look at the small number of folks that have taken advantage of the opportunity for DES, the fact that we have a procedure and it's not automatic, I think is good. I trust the superintendent to make the whole principals to the line and make sure that they're using this correctly. And I think the system is in place, and I extend that trust to our assistant superintendent for HR. Also, I think it's also what is best for the district. If it's in the best interest of the district, the most efficient use of tax dollars, then this is something that we need to continue using the way we're doing it. I would, as far as getting people ready, I know that when we switched to having assistant principals in elementary schools, which was a big deal when that happened, that opened up some opportunities for administrative training that we hadn't had before. And I think that is going to bear fruit, and superintendent can tell us whether or not it's already bearing fruit, but I think we're going to have many more experienced people ready to make it less likely we'll need to use DES. I remember very well in 1996, I can't remember what I said, excuse me, I'm not that old, 2006, when I went in to sign up for drop. And when I signed those papers, and I wasn't particularly sad when I did that, I knew, as Ms. Certain pointed out accurately, that I had 5 years, and that was it. And that was, that was my understanding. But if it were in the best interest of the district for an employee to be hired, I didn't choose to even apply for that, but I think we have to look at that. Also, I take exception to the term gaming the system. We have Dixie, Hamilton, Polk, Pinellas, Hillsborough Lake, Okeechobee, Levy, Highlands, Gadsden, and Bradford, all using the DES system. That's a pretty big game. Also, as far as double dipping, and I don't know, having my first job I ever had was for Will Calsom's dad at Dipper Dan Ice Cream, so I do have some experience with double dipping. And I'll say that those of us who went through the retirement program, and I think we have some folks on the dais that have done that, we earned every penny of that retirement. So whether or not we were hired subsequently, to me, that's a whole different issue. It's not an issue that it's costing the district any more money. The pension is not paid by the district, it's paid by the state retirement system. And so I don't think it is as bad as I don't think it's really a bad thing. And that's an honest difference of opinion. It's not an argument. So for me, I think we have to look at what's in the district's best interest, and of course, which translates to what's in the children's best interest. And I know, Mr. Shankar, I know that when we have, it's really hard in IT to find people, considering how that area has exploded, and yet our salaries have not exploded. So these are all things to consider. Not easy for administrators, not easy for department heads, but if they feel like, if they believe that this is the best option, I'm in favor of allowing that to happen, and I think we have checks in place. So I do, but I do appreciate other points of view on that, but that's where I come down on it. Dr. McNeely.
Thank you. I have a question and then a comment from my colleagues. I'd like to know, Mr. Purvis, how many employees have been denied because of the first step on page 1 under instructional? It looks like teachers must have board, superintendent, and principal approval, but the very first should be principal, because that goes to the superintendent and then to the board. And I think there are some instances when you look up that answer for me that you are going to see where some of our administrators have constantly denied employees. Don't know the reason. Maybe I should even ask what the reason might be. But I do know for some instructional staff or ESPs, they have not been recommended. So at that point, I guess it would never get to Superintendent Clark because it stops right there. And I think that has hindered some good people who have not been authorized to go to the superintendent next, not even to us. So I'd like to know that. And then from my colleagues, I'd like to know, I heard Mrs. Roy just state everyone would definitely be eligible except the drivers because of the ruling from the DES. But I'd like to know, what are your thoughts about trying to come up with something, or maybe, I don't know, more money? Because they certainly don't have the same attainment to be met as our other employees. Okay? That would do it.
Okay.
For now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. McNeely. Ms. Surton.
Dr. McNeely actually asked the question that I found in my notes that I had about the number of employees who are denied, who's denying them, and the racial composition of that, because we'd like to know if there's any type of disparity along, hopefully it would not be racial lines. Hopefully it would just be one person's stance on why, but I think we should know that. And is there something defined as, do we have a policy as to what would be in the best interest of the district? I understand instructional staff, and I said about the IT staff in the meeting when I first brought this up and voiced the issues that I have with it. Do we have a predefined policy as what's the best interest of the district? Or are we just kind of making it up, or, kind of like addressing it as on a one-off type situation? Is there anything that's written? Do we have a standard policy for that?
Could Mr. Moore, would you like to respond to that, please?
There is no specific school board policy that addresses DES, but the 2016 board action I kind of view as the last board direction in terms of what we're looking at, in terms of creating kind of an even system for all levels of employees, bringing it back to the midpoint, advertising and looking for best qualified. That's kind of the only official board pronouncement we have. There's not a board policy. I'm not even sure how I would go about drafting something with there's so many different types of employees. It'd be kind of hard to come up with a formula. So.
Thank you.
And the reason I ask is because I'm thinking in different categories of employees you would address, the challenges you're having now. Like, I think keeping fully staffed bus drivers seems to be an issue, hiring them. I know they can't go into DES, so I don't know if there's something you look at to try to figure out. I guess they don't have an option of going in the drop. They can go in the drop, but when they finish their 60 months, they have to come out, and then they have to stay out for a year. So I don't know. I'm not really sure what the workaround is for that. If you don't have a company like DES that would allow them to continue working and accumulate you receive their pension benefit to them, continue working, and have their drop fund over there, but they continue working. So I don't know of a company that does that. And I hate that there's not a workaround for them to allow them to be able to continue working and to collect their pension and to have access to their drop balance. I was trying to read and find companies over the weekend, but I wasn't able to find any, And I'm well aware of the issue with DES, and I say, me and the chair will disagree. We won't argue, but we do disagree. How I define double dipping is to continue working to get your pension. And it's not to say you didn't earn it. It's not to say that. I'm not saying you didn't earn it and it's not due to you, but it is kind of like you're on the taxpayer's dime twice in a row. That's what I'm defining as being double dipping. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Surton. Ms. Roy.
Okay, when you were talking, Mr. Hyatt, you were talking about earning every penny, and just wanted to point out that once you enter drop, you're not earning any retirement through drop, DES, or post-DES. That's over. So you're not continuing to get money from the state for your work experience. So that would just to make that clear. That's all.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Roy. Dr. Paulson.
Oh, I have no problem double dipping. I probably called it the same myself, but like I said, I'm involved on the issue. The other thing is, the extended drop, the superintendent makes the decision. That's the statute, isn't it, Mr. Moore? I'm pretty sure that's it.
I know the superintendent
As the final say,
has the final say,
which is to make his decision.
but I mean, that's true of all hiring, that the superintendent has the final
Well,
say.
I mean, but it spells it out. And we all don't get it. When I was president of the teacher union, that's a teacher on special assignment, negotiated. I didn't get extended drop. And I just figured the superintendent knows what's best for the district. It happened to me. And I'm not complaining about it. Have you ever heard me complain about it, Ms. Clark? The other, so that's, I just thought I'd throw that out.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Paulson.
Did I
Any,
turn my light on?
you did, any other board comments, Dr. McNeely?
I'm still waiting from the four of you to say, what possibly are you thinking when it comes down to the people who are not eligible, and what possibly could be done? This is our time to talk together.
I don't have an answer to that. I mean, I think that we are subject to the rules and regs of DES. It's not even rules and regs, it's what they will accept. And if, Mr. Purvis, let me ask you, if you, my understanding from what you said earlier this afternoon was that we've looked into practices from other companies similar to DES, and all of them had the same restriction as far as folks whose main job is driving a bus. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So I'm at a loss as to, which doesn't mean that there's not a way, but I'm at a loss as to what we can do to change that. That's my answer. My answer is I have no answer.
And Mr. Chair, I did hear Mr. Purvis say that, but I just cannot go home this afternoon before the next workshop and know that we have a group of employees who will not be able to benefit, especially this group. And when we look at how hard we work, I'm sure that this group of employees would certainly fall in that category. I don't, this is the only piece that I don't feel good about in the DES. Because as we said earlier, when one hurts, we all hurt. And they have come to this very board to have conversation with us. Number one, salary, and other tweaks that are coming forward now within transportation. And it's not the best.
Thank you, Dr. McNeely. Dr. Paulson.
Well, I think we could say here, we'll just go back and do our best to find a solution. Go back and really, just keep plugging till we can find one. I mean, it'd be benefit to us because we have trouble finding bus drivers. It's not like we don't want to do it, but just look under every rock, stone you have to see if there's some kind of solution. Now, when I hear you say spend some more money, maybe spend some more money on the company. I'm not for just spending money on one group. That bothers me when people come asking for one group. And maybe that's why I'm the union president. And but I like I'd like for us to do everything we can and continue to do it, to try to help them find out. Like I said, it's not only helping them, it's helping us, right? Mr. Purvis, you guys aren't swimming with applicants for bus drivers, are you?
For not any position, sir.
Especially bus drivers.
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, I think we should make a statement that we will continue to look and try to see if we can do something. I don't know what the answer is, except for we should just put every effort we have to solve what you're saying should be solved. I don't think anybody disagrees with you, Dr. McNeely. I think you're making a good point. It is a shame that they're the only ones that can't do it.
Ms. Roy. Thank you, Dr. Paulson.
Thank you. I agree. You know, there is no solution that I can figure out right now. I know that there are many, this is 1 year they can't work, right? The 1 year after they are finished drop. You know, there are many opportunities in this community to drive a bus, and they have experience, so they're desirable, you know, driving for retirement centers or whatever. There's a lot of, so, you know, it's not a very good answer, but I just wanted to point that out. Also, as far as salary, when the Superintendent's Association did an audit for the district, I don't know what that was called.
Fads?
Fads, yeah. When Fads, it was all the superintendents in the state have an organization that comes into the district and evaluates all of your programs and sees how you're, and I just remember they were, you know, earlier than we were, they were saying, you got to keep good employees. You know, we're for DES, you know, and so that was one thing. But the other thing is that they said our bus drivers were paid better. I'm not saying that it's not that it's a good salary, but overall in this state, they are one of the highest paid categories compared to bus drivers in other districts. So, you know, we tried, was it last year, we gave a little bit extra to even, you know, we broke our rule that we were not going to pay every category the same amount because of all the reasons that Dr. McNeely has said. So they got more, and I just don't know where we would find extra money to pay more for bus drivers. And really, it's not only a problem in this district. I mean, I was looking at the city. The city's bus drivers are fit to be tied because they're not paid enough. And, you know, they're lobbying and saying we can't afford to work for this amount of money. So, you know, it's a problem, and I'm very sorry that we have this, and I think Dr. Paulson's right. We have to look for solutions, but we can't just pay more to one class of employees than others.
Thank you, Ms. Roy. Ms. Surton.
Possibly maybe a solution. Dr. McNeely, I kind of said what I had done over the weekend and trying to research to find something, but I was sitting here thinking, I don't know if it's possible that if there's some other position that the bus driver would qualify for at the end of their drop period, if they could be approved to do DES for that 1 year in a different position that they would qualify for, that they would get some type of, I don't want to say preference, but they'd be encouraged to apply for another position to work in DES for the 1 year, and then if they so desired at the end of that 1 year, they could loop back to go to bus driver, or they could stay as, you know, and go back to bus driver as an employee. I don't know how the rules would impact that after that 1 year, but maybe they could have a 1 year transition in a non-transportation position that they would qualify for. I don't know if it's in as a para or as in facilities or something. I don't know. Maybe that's something that I just thought of just now sitting here. But I do understand the liability and all. But like I said, I looked. I can't think of the other name of the company that I saw that covers a couple of districts that are in the southern part of the state. But they also did not. They also excluded bus drivers. So.
Ms. Surton, that's a start. And so I appreciate your comment. And I'm hoping that Mr. Purvis, as well as the Assistant Superintendent of Operations, will look into that because it's all of our employees, but specifically the two departments should be immediately working on it.
Thank you, Ms. Surton. Thank you, Dr. McNeely. Dr. Paulson.
Like I said, though, I said don't pay them, but if you have to pay a company a little bit more than that company, that would be, I think, something you could look into. The other thing is, and you could also put it, because I was thinking that the idea would, if we hire them someplace else, they want to continue, they got to go back to being a bus driver. That should be understood. Just an idea. I mean, I don't know if you know, this is just something we brought up now. It's something we can look into and discuss further.
And you know what, Dr. Paulson? They may, in that year, if we could get it that way, they may do so well that they won't want to go back.
Well, but I think we're looking for them over here.
We would want them to go back, correct.
That's why I said, I knew when I said
need-
it, somebody might say something like that, but, you know, I'm also trying to fill the bus driver's need there.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Paulson. Thank you, Dr. McNeely. Any further comments or questions from board members? As we're closing this part of the workshop, I want to thank Mr. Purvis and the entire HR department for helping us understand how we're doing things, help us understand procedure, help us understand the way it's been working, and I think that gives us the information we need for further discussion and improvement. But I certainly appreciate everything done. I'm going to sort of look at my fellow board members here. Would you like about a 3-minute or 4-minute break? Is that something you'd like, or do you want to plow ahead?
Chairman Hyde, if I would ask that the board take about a 3-minute break because I need to confer with our public information officer for just a moment.
Okay.
On a completely issue non-related to what we're doing, but yeah, she looks at me crazy.
We're going to recess until 3:19. Okay, thank you very much. I apologize for being late in resuming the meeting, but things were happening. And so Ms. Johnson is now back with us, and we'd like to welcome you, and we'll go ahead and get started with the strategic planning presentation. Thank you.
afternoon. Hello.
Goals 1 and 2 are robust and heavily related with student data points that I outcomes 1A and B relate to state assessments, and those outcomes targeted at meeting or exceeding the state average in all FSA tested subjects and on all end-of-the-year state exams.
Mr. Sherman, will you tilt that mic a little more toward you? Thank you. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. The first area we'll begin with is the English Language Arts Assessment. This assessment is given at grades 3 through 10, and this shows our district's achievement in English Language Arts, showing the percentage of students who score at or above level 3 on that assessment. The slides to the left, the darker red color, show the Alachua County percentage of students, and those to the right, the orange, show the state of Florida's percentage of students, so we can compare our district to the state average in those categories. The FSA test has been in existence for 4 years now, so these data cover from 2015 through 2018, the 4 years that we've had the same test. And you can see that for each of those 4 years, and currently, Alachua County does exceed the state average achievement on English language arts. Next category is mathematics, another test that is given at grades 3 through 8, and then also repeats an end-of-course exam. This is the overall mathematics achievement for the district. And again, you can see that Alachua County meets the state average with 56% of our students achieving at level 3 or above.
I need a question.
Quick question.
Yes, it's quick. You did not set the parameters for this workshop, so are they the same as we just got out of the other one?
Well-
Wait, and before we start asking.
Okay, I think that's probably a very good point, Dr. McNeely. And I thought, I guess there's some folks that were not here when we started, so if you'll pardon me, Mr. Charbonnet, sorry to interrupt, but just the procedure we're doing this is we have the presentation, and at the time I'm asking board members to, as much as possible, let the presentation continue. If you have a quick clarifying question, that's fine, but we don't want to get into a back and forth discussion. We have plenty of time for that later. Following that, there'll be a chance for public comment, and the public comment is specifically on this topic, and that would be the same procedure we normally have as far as 3 minutes. Following public comment, at that point, we will have I'm sure, a full and robust board discussion and questions to staff at that point. Yes. Dr. McNeely, thank you for pointing that out. Okay, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. The statewide science assessment is administered at grades 5 and 8, and this slide displays the 4 years of data of Alachua County compared to the state achievement on the 5th grade science exam, where we meet the state average in terms of percentage of students level 3 or above. The next slide shows the 8th grade science exam, where Alachua County exceeds the state average currently by 3 percentage points. The next few slides will address state end-of-course exams, or EOC exams. These exams are administered to students who are enrolled in those particular courses, so not specifically by grade level. The first is the Algebra 1 EOC, and we can see that currently Alachua County is 1 percentage point below the state average, with 60% of our students achieving level 3 and above. The state average is 61%. So we have seen an increase in 2 percentage points last year, but the state also increased, so we still have goals ahead of us. in Algebra 1. Next category is the geometry end of course exam, where Alachua does exceed the state average by 8 percentage points of students at level 3 or above. So those are the two mathematics-related end of course exams. On the biology exam, Alachua County is at 68%, the state average at 65% of students above level 3 or 3 or above. For the civics end of course exam, we've seen a steady increase on the state average where Alachua County has fluctuated, and at this point we are 2 percentage points below the state average percentage of students scoring 3 or higher. Alachua County at 69, the state at 71. And our final end of course exam to present today is the U.S. History EOC, where Alachua County's students, we have 3 percentage points higher than the state's average of students at level 3 or higher. So in summary, Alachua meets or exceeds the state average on ELA grades 3 through 8, math grades 3 through 8, the geometry, biology, and U.S. history end of course exams, and both grade levels for the state science assessment. Alachua County is below the state average, 1 percentage point below in Algebra 1 EOC, and 2 percentage points below on the civics EOC. As the board is considering setting strategic priorities, you know that our issue of achievement gaps, racial achievement gaps in Alachua County is addressed in the equity plan, not specifically covered in the strategic plan, although there is reference to subgroups in the strategic plan. But as a strategic priority, this is one the board has addressed with your adoption of our equity plan. So reviewing a comparison of white student achievement and black student achievement in Alachua County compared to white students, African American students statewide, with a focus on the size of our achievement gaps that are addressed in our equity plan. So in English language arts, a 45% achievement gap. In mathematics, another 45% achievement gap. In science, the gap is at 48 percentage points. And in social studies, 42 percentage points describes the size of our gap. You can see that in all categories that white students in Alachua County achieve at greater percentages than white students across the state of Florida, whereas our African American achievement lags behind the African American achievement of the rest of the state average. So our goal in the equity plan is to close that achievement gap by maintaining high achievement for all students, but especially focusing on raising the achievement of our African American students to close those gaps. Our state accountability system, as you know, grades not only our schools, but also our districts. We receive a district grade. And again, while this is not specifically addressed in the strategic plan, it has been a strategic priority for the school board to look at our district grade. Currently, we have a district grade of B, and we are very close to being an A district. We have 60% of the total possible points, and 62 percentage points are required to be an A district. The district grade is based on an average of 11 different components, each with a possible 100% that are then averaged to give us the total of the possible points available. So to increase the district grade in each of those components for us to go up 2 percentage points to equal those 2 points we need would require 22 points spread out across each of those components. So I'll quickly exhibit those. 4 of the components deal with student achievement, and we can see comparing 2017 to 2018, In 2018, Alachua County is at 57% of our students level 3 or higher in English language arts, 58% in math, 59 in science, 71 in social studies, remembering that an average of 62 of all 11 components is required to be an A district. There are also 4 components related to learning gains, so comparing individual students' achievement from the prior year to the subsequent year and looking for a learning gain and the percentage of students who made a gain. So currently, our most recent data, 55% of students overall made a learning gain in English language arts, and 57% made a learning gain in mathematics. But there's also separate categories focusing particularly on the students in the lowest quartile of achievement, because those are the students that have the prior year had the greatest challenges with student achievement. So they are focused on particularly as an area that districts and schools must attempt to raise. And Alachua County's lowest quartile gains were 40% in English language arts and 40% in mathematics. So these are actually the 2 of our 11 components that are the lowest, and for us to make up those points that we need to get to an A district, that's an area of focus, and all of our schools are aware of the importance of the children that are in the lowest quartile. And
on the lowest quartile, excuse me, mathematics, 41 and 40, is that right?
We were 41 percentage points in 2017, went down to 40 percentage points in 2018.
Well, ask him later. Let's keep going. Thank you.
Okay. And then the final 3 categories that go into calculating our district grade are acceleration and graduation rate. And middle school acceleration, we are getting 80% of the possible points. College and career acceleration refers to our high school acceleration, and that increased last year by 5 percentage points up to 60, and our graduation rate also a 5 percentage point increase to 83%. So the percentages in each of those 11 categories are then averaged in order to calculate our district grade.
Okay, Ms. Roy.
What does acceleration mean? Does that mean higher level courses?
It's calculated differently at middle school and at high school. At the middle school level, it's the percentage of students who score level 3 or higher on a high school end of course exam. And that's primarily Algebra 1 in our district. So the percentage of our middle schoolers who pass the high school Algebra 1 test. Also, middle school students that earn a high school industry certification.
So they would be.
That's the numerator. The denominator are students who in the 7th grade scored at a level 3 in mathematics. So then those students are looked at in the 8th grade to see if they succeed in a high school EOC or earn an industry certification. So that's middle school acceleration. High school acceleration is based on the graduating class. So you look at that year's cohort of graduates, and of those graduates, the percentage who passed an exam that would equal college credit, so 3 on an AP exam or a 4 on an ACE or IB exam, as well as the percentage of students that earned an industry certification at some point during their 4 years. It also includes students who pass a dual enrollment course.
Well, that's very complicated. I wouldn't have done that. Thank you.
I got it, Ms. Roy.
Quick clarification for the question.
The dark, okay, and acceleration and learning gains, the black ones is last year? Or is that, and the gray one is this year?
Referring to this current slide?
Yeah, the one where it says 80 and 80, and the one before it where it had the learning.
Yes, sir. 2017 is last year, is the red, and then the orange is this year. Oh, I'm sorry, you have black and white.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So again, to reiterate this point in terms of our assessment data show that in nearly every area, Alachua meets or exceeds state averages. But I do want to point out that with our lowest quartile students, we are well below the state average in terms of our ranking for the achievement of those areas. And so that is a priority for us as a district, and especially in the curriculum department, focusing on the achievement of our lowest quartiles and having those students achieve a learning gain. Okay. Outcome 1C specifically addresses the dropout rate, with the outcome stating that the dropout rate will be lower than or equal to the state's rate. And this graph shows from 2015 to 2018, Alachua County's dropout rate on the left, the state dropout rate on the right, and as our graduation rate has increased, so our dropout rate has declined, and as of 2018, our dropout rate equals the state dropout rate at 4 percentage points. Outcome D, we will meet or exceed the state's graduation rate. Again, showing 4 years of data, the Alachua County graduation rate steadily increased over that time. We exceeded the state graduation rate in 2017, and in 2018, Alachua County is now 2 percentage points ahead of the state graduation rate at 88%.
Question?
Ms. Roy?
Does that include charters as well?
Yes, ma'am.
It does?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow. And, well, micro school is a charter.
Well, and the following slide outlines the graduation rates over the last 2 years for all of our schools. So you can see there are 7 traditional high schools at the top, as well as our 2 charter schools. And last year, each of our schools saw an increase in the graduation rate, including our charters. And those students do count in our district graduation rate. The majority of those students are students that have been in Alachua County, most at one of our traditional schools before electing to attend a charter school. So they do count as our children as well. So. The next slide refers to graduation rate by reported subgroups. To the left, we can see 2016-17 and each of the reported subgroups comparing Alachua County to the state. And on the right, that same comparison for the year 2017-18. Currently, Alachua County exceeds the state average for every reported subgroup except for African American students, where Alachua County is 2 percentage points below the state average, and Hispanic students, where we are 1 percentage point below the state average. But notably, the rate for African American students did increase by 11% year over year from 2017 to 2018. And for students with disabilities, an increase of 19 percentage points on that graduation rate. So those are 2 important groups of students within our district and who have historically lagged behind the overall rate. So as more African American students and students with disabilities graduate, that raises the total graduation rate as well. Mrs. Wise will now share some information on career and technical programs.
Good afternoon. Mrs. Wise is happy that her favorite CTE phone a friend has joined us. Thank you, Mr. McElroy. The next several slides are all about our CTE programs, and they do come from different parts of the strategic plan, but they're lumped together so that we can talk about all the career and technical programs at the same time. Outcome 1F is about increasing the minority enrollment in CTE programs by 10%. So in 15-16, we had 1,808 students, which was 29% of students enrolled in CTE programs. And this year, in 18-19, we have 1,961 students, which represents 31.6% of the total enrollment. The way the goal was written was in the number, which this represents a 19% increase in the number of students. The next goal jumps to outcome 6B, and this was a tricky one. This is, the goal was written to increase the career and technical student internships by 20%. And as we were trying to put this information together for the board, we found this is a difficult statistic to track for many reasons. This isn't something that you can find on EduStats or in Skyward because it's organized by the directors of the different academies. And so what we do know is that there are students participating during the school year in work experiences, in job-embedded experiences, and then there are internships that happen in the summer. And those internships are monitored by teachers who are employed through the Perkins Grant to monitor those summer internships. And then those participating through the school year in work experiences, those are a variety across all of our programs. Some of them involve every single student in the program. Some of them involve only juniors and seniors. It just depends, and some of them involve all of the grade levels. It depends on the different programs. So this was a little bit the way the goal was written, and the way we are operationalizing internships isn't a clean match. Outcome 4E is one that we probably had no idea back when this goal was written, the way this would explode. This was a goal written to increase enrollment in eSchool by 10%. And so in 13-14, we had 983 part-time students and 68 full-time students. And this year, we have 3,100 part-time students and 163 full-time students. There was a goal written to increase the participation in credit retrieval and GED diploma options for high schools students who are credit deficient by 10%. When you saw the data that Mr. Charbonnet presented about the graduation rate, these really aren't numbers that we're chasing in terms of having high school students be taking more crop classes or more GEDs. So I want to show you this graph. Over time, as our graduation rate is increasing, our GED, which is the solid line at the bottom, our GED graduate numbers have gone slightly down, and our credit retrieval numbers have gone down significantly. The number of credits is traditionally not the barrier. This isn't what's keeping our students from graduating. Our students have the opportunity. There are, when you really start looking at the action steps, it talks about making sure we have unlimited crop slots and things like that. The demand for credit retrieval is met in every place. It's during the school day, outside of the school day, online, out at home. There's many different ways the students can retrieve the credits.
Now we're into Goal 2. Goal 2 addresses a safe and orderly environment. As you know, that is critical to student achievement. So the first outcome from Goal 2, Goal 2A, is to decrease the out-of-school suspensions by 10%. This goal is also reflected in the equity plan. So this graphic shows out-of-school suspensions in Alachua County, total out-of-school suspensions in the top solid line, and suspensions of African-American students in the second dotted line, showing the last 4 years plus the first semester data for this year. So since 2015, overall suspensions are down 15 percentage points, or 15%, sorry. Comparing the first semester of this school year to the first semester of last year, suspensions are down 11% in 2019, and suspensions of African American students are down 20% over 1 year ago for the first semester. Outcome 2B refers specifically for referrals for fighting and bullying, and a decrease by 10%. So this graph shows the top line, the number of referrals for fighting, the bottom line, the number of referrals for bullying. And again, it shows just the first semester data for 2019, but the total data for the last 4 years. So you can see from the bottom graphic that over the last 4 years, referrals for bullying is down 73%. Referrals for fighting has fluctuated year by year, some years up, some years down. This year, we'll see what the second semester bears, whether we will exceed or reduce from the previous semester. The next outcome is actually written by school rather than by district total. So this outcome specifies that the schools will maintain an average daily attendance of 94% or above. So measuring the average daily attendance of each individual school. So this graphic shows, again, a 2-year comparison. You can see the number of schools with an average daily attendance of 94% or greater is on the far left. The bar to the farthest left was 2017-18, and the bar beside that, the one that shows 37, that's for 2018-19. So for over the last 2 years, you can see 22 of our schools had a percentage of 94% or higher, and this year 37 of our schools are at 94% or higher. And this year there's one school that is at 93% and one school that is 86%. Those are both alternative schools, and they have both. Each of those schools have shown increases in their average daily attendance. Another development that will impact considerations of strategic priorities is the new Every Student Succeeds Act, federal legislation known as ESSA. I just wanted to highlight this with a couple of slides for us to be thinking about how ESSA is going to have an impact on school improvement plans and what your principals and SACs will be doing in schools for the coming years as required by this new federal law. So ESSA will annually require the release of a federal index for each school. And this will be each school, including charter schools, center schools, alternative schools, and DJJ schools. So this will be, in effect, a federal report card, almost a federal grade for each school, but it will include schools that haven't typically gotten a school grade in past years. So ESSA will bring the achievement at those schools to the fore. In addition to having an overall school federal index, the index is also calculated for 10 subgroups within each school. So there will be disaggregated data for economically disadvantaged students, for all the race and ethnicity categories, for students with disabilities, and English language learners. And the federal index in Florida's plan is very closely tied to our school grading system. So ESSA will almost mirror our school grades. The only other component is language acquisition of English language learners. But otherwise, it's the same 11 components that are used for school grade, but it'll be broken down by each of these 10 subgroups within the school. Okay. So ESSA categories for accountability and school improvement, there are 2. One called comprehensive support and intervention, and this is the category for any school that has an overall federal index below 41%. As the ESSA federal index as a baseline using 2017-18 data has been released so that districts and schools can be aware of this new accountability and to begin planning for it. So using the baseline data from last year, we had 9 of our traditional schools within the school district that will qualify for comprehensive support and intervention if ESSA had gone into place this year. Now, we will get the at the first year that ESSA counts for accountability and school improvement this summer after school grades come out. Any schools that qualify for comprehensive support and intervention, their school improvement plans will be approved by you, the board, as well as by the state. And there will be additional components that have to be addressed in those school improvement plans. The second category for accountability and school improvement under ESSA is called targeted support and intervention. These are schools that have an overall federal index above 41, but any of the 10 subgroups is below 41. So when you disaggregate the data for all 10 of those subgroups, we found that using last year as a baseline, 27 of our schools in Alachua County would qualify for targeted assistance or targeted support and intervention under ESSA because they have at least one subgroup that is below 41%. And that will require schools to include in their school improvement plans that will be approved by you as the district school board. So just to elucidate that further, using again the baseline, just to give us an idea of how ESSA may impact the district, you can see across the bottom of this graph shows the number of subgroups out of 10 within a school that did not achieve the 41% on their federal index. And if you look to the far right, we had 2 of our traditional schools in the district that had 0 of their subgroups below 41%. So all of the other schools had at least one subgroup that was below that level, ranging all the way up to as high as 6 subgroups in 2 of our schools. So that will have a significant impact on how school improvement plans are written and the priorities for SACs and what they bring to you in their school improvement. So that completes the student data portion of our review. Now we'll turn it over to Mr. Purvis for the human resources.
Thank you, sir. Recruitment and retention, outcome 3A. The district will provide salary compensation for all employees that is market competitive with the Northeast Florida region. And as you can see, the regional salary is $43,232. ACPS salary $42,839. This does not include this year's 4% raise in these salary. Increase the placement of minority instructional staff by 15% in 3 years. You can see in 16-17, we were at 22.6% of new hires were minorities. 18-19, as of February 26th, 31%. 3-year increase in the number of minority hires is 19%. And a higher percentage of minority applicants are being hired than is represented in the applicant pool. The district will sustain retention of 90% of highly effective staff at the end of 3 years. Over the last 3 years, we have an 80% of highly effective staff retained. This past year is 89%. Provide mentoring programs that facilitate a retention rate of 95% of newly hired effective instructional staff. The current school year is 83%. Just as a little sidebar, the national retention rate for first-year teachers is 80%. Florida is usually 15 to 20% lower than that.
Good afternoon. Environmental stewardship. The outcome of 5C, the district using baseline data will reduce energy usage by 10% over a 3-year period. We've had a 9% reduction in energy use in intensity since 2010 as measured by the Department of Energy. The important thing to note here, well, actually there are a couple of things. One, we added a new school since 2010. Also, our energy usage in terms of the numbers of computers in our schools has gone up significantly. And in that context, we've still been able to lower our consumption by 9%. We've also had a 19% reduction in water use intensity since 2010 as measured by the U.S. Department of Energy.
In regards to family engagement, Outcome 6A was that the district would increase the number of adults mentoring students by 20%, and the number of mentors we had in 2013 was 1,029, and the number of mentors we have this school year, or I'm sorry, last school year is 1,275, which represents a 24% increase. Outcome 6C said that the district will increase parent guardian engagement in their students' education by 20%. And the way that we try to track this is by the number of parents who access our parent portal, which our student information system has changed since the plan was written. So the number of parents who were signed on to parent portal after 10 years was 10,000. They were signed on, that was to our old system, Infinite Campus, I'm sorry, lost my word for a minute. The number of parents signed on for Family Access in Skyward as of November of 2018 was 8,667. Of those 8,667 parents, the number of logins for this school year is 223,000. This slide, I believe, I should have been listening a little more carefully, was to try to encompass all of the things that we are trying as we endeavor as departments and your representatives to pay attention to are impacted by initiatives that have had and will continue to have impact on us, and there's been some significant changes since the plan was written. Mr. Charbonnet talked to us about ESSA, the elimination of Executive Order 1932, elimination of the Common Core Florida standards, which are in the process of review and revision right now, our equity plan that came online, our new half-cent for schools, Safe Schools Act, and other statewide legislative and policy changes, such as changes in the accountability system. And all of those things drive our work. So outcome 7E was the strategic plan calls for the board to establish those one-year priorities at the beginning of each budget cycle. And I think that's what began this conversation at the last board meeting.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Wise. Thank you to all of our presenters for getting through a lot of information that I think is very helpful and in a very efficient manner. Before we start board discussion, we're going to have an opportunity for public comment. We'll have 3 minutes as we do at regular board meetings. I do ask that the subject actually be the subject of the workshop. And we've already had public comment opportunity for the DES, so that is not included right now. This is input or comments. It's not a dialogue. So if there are things that as a member of the public you need to find out, I think we will absolutely do our best to connect you with the right person or people that would help you get that information. So it's not, we're not going to be just winging it here. We want to make sure that you get accurate information. So at this point, do we have anybody that would like to address the board? Dr. Katurba.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. Can you hear me okay? I will not ask questions. I will just go ahead and talk because I do have a few things to cover, as you know. I think we're here to talk about the how this data interacts with the strategic plan. How do you go forward based on this data? And I think there's several points that I want to make quickly. One is which sometimes you need to dive into the data a little bit further in order to know what's actually going on. And I do not think that any of the end-of-course tests were disaggregated. And I will say, even though the overall student population performs better than the state average, the black student performance is consistently lower than the state average on every test you want to look at. Algebra 1, I think that you have to look at who's taking Algebra 1 and when they are taking Algebra 1 to understand what's going on with Algebra 1. Most white students and Asian students are taking Algebra 1 in middle school. Most black, and I'll say the majority of black students, except for about 130, are taking Algebra 1 in high school, either in 9th grade or now in 10th grade. The majority of those students are failing at level 1. That are taking, the black students are taking Algebra 1 in 9th grade or 10th grade. And so I think that might direct some strategic plan. That's why I'm bringing up these things, not to be critical. I think you also you don't need to just look at level 3, which is satisfactory. In Broward County, superintendent evaluation included information on level 1 students. Students that are defined by the Florida standards as inadequate in need of strong support, intensive support. And if you want to look at that, and you also need to look at that by race and you need to look at that by gender, because there are profound differences in this county between level 1 student performance, between white males, white females, black males, black females. And it is profound and it is disturbing because there are thousands of students performing at level 1. Literally thousands. And that, I haven't counted them, I just counted between grade 3 and grade 10 for FSA language arts, and between grade 3 and grade 8 for math, because that's when it's given. We're not including the rest of the students or Hispanic students. I just looked at black and white, and we still have thousands. I think it's worth talking about graduation rates in that, yes, they've gone up a lot at the state level. They've gone up amazingly here. And if you look at the withdrawal and entry codes for the graduation rates, you'll see that one school is primarily responsible because they started using a lot of alternative assessments when they hadn't been doing that before. They're also allowing different codes to be used. So yes, I know that a lot of the high schools are doing great work getting students to graduate, but there's also code stuff going on and a lot of alternative assessments, including ACT, SAT, the PERT exam. Okay, I guess I'm done. The magnet programs, I would encourage you to look at, not use the word minority, because we have a lot more Hispanics attending, but the black student enrollment has not increased over 3 years.
I think you're sort of continuing. Thank you.
I'm Carl Smith. Thank you, board members. A couple of observations. One is, I'm not sure what the process is that we're using for this. There's a process for doing strategic plans, from vision to mission to environmental and situational analysis to SWOT analysis to strategic conclusions, to goals, to performance measurements, et cetera. So I'm not sure which one we're using. I would ask for us to visit that. That process would lead us to ask ourselves if the information that's presented today represents the ESA. This is the environmental and situational analysis. Let's evaluate that now and determine what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what are our opportunities and our threats, and use that to drive us toward the superintendent's vision that leads to very specific goals with very specific outcomes. I think it will help us in the area of gaps because there's a lot of good things going on, but there are a number of things that are not even in the strategic plan that are core foundation. The equity plan is not even in the strategic plan, as one example. The most recent development with our Head Start program is not in the strategic plan. Wouldn't be in there unless you did your ESA, got the information you got last week, and started building on it as I recommend. And that we have ways of communicating to the public what is going on and how are we working on the areas of deficiency. What are our specific corrective action plans and how are we communicating that to the public? And don't limit it to just your website. Our half-cent sales tax is a new item that we have it. Now, here's how we plan to use it. Here's how we plan to communicate it to the public, et cetera. Those things create the level of ownership that I think we need to have from the public. And we have to ask ourselves, how do we get public input based on this new information? We've got some from years ago, but how do we get current public input based on this new information and the plans that come out of that? And lastly, when we look at highly effective, how does that look staff versus the persons in classrooms? Typically, we find staff ratings, administrative staff ratings, very high in terms of effectiveness. And in the classrooms, those teachers are struggling more. And the data didn't break that out, and I think it would be a critical observation for the board to make. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Do you have anyone else? Okay.
Hello, Julie Crosby, Chairman Hyatt, Board. I'd like to bring up three things I have questions about. One, I don't know if Mr. Charbonnet can explain, but I didn't understand exactly how the district grade, what the formula was for determining that letter B. When we're 53 in games of the lowest quartile in English language arts and 61 in math, that would not, I don't understand how it's determined to come up with a B. That just seems, it does not make sense to me that we would be a B. I listened, but I didn't hear the breakdown. I have a question about recruitment and retention of teachers. When we have 22.6% of new hires were minorities in 2016-17, 31% in the next year. I would like to know what minorities includes. What is the breakdown of that? Minorities, does that include Asian, African American? Is that female? What is that? What does the category of minorities include? And then on the family engagement piece, this sort of goes to the last speaker. In community engagement, it's great to see the increase in, it says parents using family access and a parent portal, but how do we know for sure that that's parents signing in? Is there a way to know that those were parents and not students looking to check grades? That's a very, very significant increase, which is wonderful, over 210 or so thousand increase in 1 year. But is this because, was the system fully in place from the year before? Is this now in place, and is that why the increase is there? And do we know that this is really parents? Also, not everyone has internet access. And I would love to see that a more robust way of increasing family engagement than just using a category, once again, of an internet sign-on. So that would be my request for that area. Thank you.
Thank you. And we had three questions, and I would identify Mr. Charbonnet for question 1, Assistant Superintendent Purvis for question 2, and Ms. Johnson for question 3. So if you would, before leaving today, if you'll get your contact information to Ms. Ramos, she'll make sure that everybody has that and can respond to you. Ms. Ramos, raise your hand. Yes. Thank you. Anyone else? We're not going to do a follow-up. We're not doing a follow-up. We're not doing a follow-up. Anyone else? Okay. We're going to go ahead now. I do appreciate the public input. We're going to go ahead with board member superintendent discussion and questions. And before we do that, again, thank you to the, once again, to the presenters. I thought it was an excellent bit of data. Okay, Dr. Paulson.
All right. Yes, that's interesting. It will give us something to think about. But I think right now we need to look at our strategic plan. You put in there the 7E, the district budget will undergo the annual review in terms of board priorities being aligned to the district strategic plan. But it also, and it should be at the beginning of the budget cycle. But the next thing in 7F is a preliminary budget will be presented to the board no later than April 15th, with expected expenditures not exceeding projected revenues. If revenues do not exceed expenditures, the board will be presented with a proposed and prioritized list of budget items that may be eliminated, if indeed, based on the information available at the time. These items will be prioritized to have the least effect on the classroom level. We need to have this strategic plan prioritized tonight. We did this on March 20 last year, and then October 4th, 2016 before that. So it's we as the board, not the superintendent, we should have told you we needed this in January. So I think tonight we need to do that. We need to set our priorities. Doesn't mean we're not going to do the other things. Doesn't mean we're not going to look into other things. It just means this time, at this time, we have to have one. We have a budget process going on with you, Mr. Rella. The state's in session, and we need to know what our priorities are. I remember the last time we had somebody said we haven't done anything with the strategic plan. Mrs. Hollinger, when she was here, reported and updated the strategic plan. She put goals at every school, every grade, so each school could improve, like third grade, what would they need to improve? Our staff went into a tremendous amount of work. And I stated in the minutes, I've been waiting 2 years for that to happen. For 2 years, it was like pulling teeth to get anything done in the strategic plan, previous to Mrs. Hollinger. After we did a lot of work on the strategic plan to get it to where it was. And I'm sorry, but that's as blunt as I can say it. We also had somebody come in meeting in that October 4th, 16, a citizen expressed dissatisfaction about not having an analysis of the last plan's priorities. I stated there was nothing done on the strategic plan over the last 2 years, so therefore no analysis. In response to a question about whether anyone was held responsible, I said yes. And we'll just leave it at that. Last year we went in, we had priorities. At the time, last year our priorities were past the 1 mil, not have any D or F schools. We don't have any F schools. We don't want to have D schools either. And we want to increase the bottom 25, bottom quartile, which I see we didn't do much of that in the representation we got this afternoon. I think is that correct? So anyway, we need to look at that. So that was interesting. We also said salaries were important. And we want instructional salaries. We want to improve them to the upper 2/3. We are 7 slots away from that. We've reduced it 7 slots. We have to reduce it 7 more. Hopefully the 4% raise they're getting right now will do that. We also we have our supplements tied to the beginning teacher salary. Our beginning teacher salary in the last 9 years, which would give you an idea of what our raises were, it's gone up 57.8%, which comes out to over 3% a year. That's for 3 years, all we had was bonuses because we had a depression. And if you just check it, go back and find out what the beginning teacher salary is. Look at our salary schedule, which is tied to the beginning teacher salary. And that's when you'll come up with. So I think that's, we've been doing our best. I think we're doing a pretty good job with that. Hopefully we can continue this year. We also have, as one of our priorities, was that we wanted to raise the lowest salary, beginning teacher salary for ESPs to $15, but we counted our health insurance. And people say, well, you can't spend health insurance. Well, you can't spend, you'd have to spend it on the health insurance if you didn't have it. So, I mean, that doesn't even make sense to me. So what happens is we are up to, if you have a employee, an ESP that works full-time, 252 days a year, 2,016 hours, they are at $14.14 an hour when you take the health insurance. If you take, but we do the other things other plans don't do. We have a lot of people who are bus drivers are guaranteed 7 hours. They're making over $15 an hour right now counting the health insurance. We have people that are making going at 6 hours. It's costing the district $16 to $17 an hour. And we also give health insurance, full health insurance, to people with 4 hours. Those are our food service people. And those people work for their health insurance. That's costing us right under $20 an hour. But I think we continue to do it because these are our neediest people. So that's what we're doing in that. The other one is reduce that was 2 years ago. We wanted to increase our minority hiring, which we've been doing, and reduce out-of-school suspensions. And then last year we came in, but because of what's happening, our number one priority is now safety and secure facilities for employees and students. 2, we passed the half-cent sales tax. 3, again, we raised the salaries. And I think we should continue to try to do that. And no DRF schools and raise the lowest quartile, which after looking at today, I don't think we've been as successful as we want. And then we had the Institute Developer Equity Program, which covers a lot of the other areas. And that's why we made that our 5th priority. So, I mean, that's what I think those are good priorities. I think we could add another one because the half-cent sales tax has been secured. So I would just hope we do that, Mr. Hyatt, on our strategic plan. I think that's all I'm going to put on that. I might come back later. But the strategic plan has been updated. We had a little lull in there. I was going to read something else, but it's not going to, a lot of people here wouldn't like to hear what was read. Something I have in writing. Because we got criticized by that FADS report, Mrs. Roy, because we weren't implementing our strategic plan. The FADS report came in and said, looks like that's not being done anymore. So it was a battle. It's a battle I don't want to continue to have to fight, a strategic plan. We appreciate the input from the public. We'll continue to go out and get the input. We had input when we first did it of thousands of people. I showed it last time at the board meeting. And I think we can go ahead and we'll be glad to have input, maybe even go out and have community forums in the future. When we hired our superintendent, one of the things we liked, most of them, was the idea that they met more than once a year. We need to be meeting at least 4 times a year on the strategic plan. But again, Mrs. Clark, it's our strategic plan. We ought to remind you of that. You got reminded of this and had everything done in 2 weeks. So we appreciate that. But it's not your fault. It's our fault as a board. And we'll make sure we do better. Anything else? So anyway, I just hope tonight when we leave, it shouldn't take that, we should all give our chance. Doesn't matter how many. We have 4 that I would like to see continued. But again, doesn't mean we've had, one of the frustrations I've seen is we forget about everything else. You need to focus on certain things you want to accomplish. I've been in charge of a lot of programs, a lot of years. Every one I've ever been in, and they've been pretty successful. People have priorities and goals they set, and they don't just become a jack of all trades, a master of none. You do your best to get everything done, but just go out and prioritize. And I hope we do that tonight. I think otherwise we would be not living up to our responsibilities that we've spelled out for ourselves, and that is to have this during the budget process. We're going to be giving it to Mr. Rella late as it is, and I think we've been remiss in not having it done before this. So that's it. I might come back later as.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Paulson. Before I call on any other board members, I had a question for Mr. Delaney. And when we adopt our priorities, does that involve a vote?
Yes.
Well, if it involves a vote, we cannot vote today.
Right.
Let's hope it's still today.
Right.
And since it's not on the agenda for tomorrow, we can't vote on it tomorrow. Now, what I totally agree with Dr. Paulson with the importance of this, but I just wanted to make sure that we're doing this correctly and by requirement. And I would expect that all of us, as of right now, Dr. Paulson was very clear in what his priorities he'd like to see. And I think we can all do that. Correct me if I'm not right, but I just wanted to make sure the public knew and that we cannot. This is a workshop, not a business meeting, so there are no votes. And so I would say that between now and the next board meeting, then we'll need to have that on the agenda. And Ms. Johnson, do you want to respond to any of that, or have I got it okay?
That would be correct, and I'd certainly be happy if the board members want to submit, if you want to discuss it now based on last year's, that would be fine. If you would prefer to send some to me and I can come up with some of the commonalities and present that, whatever the board's pleasure.
Thank you very much. I'll just a second. Sure. And I would, I see, unless council tells me otherwise, I see certainly no problem in everybody discussing priorities today. But I just wanted to make sure that there was an understanding that voting wasn't included in that. Dr. Paulson, you had a quick follow-up?
No, it's a quick follow-up. But one is I hope this never happens again, that we set up a schedule when we're going to review our strategic plan, whether it's quarterly, biannually, when we're going to do it. As a board, we need to be more cognizant of that. I don't expect you to do this, but yes, you could say this is an emergency and put it on the agenda. But again, that's putting you on the spot. I don't think nobody else on the board probably would agree to that.
Well, I'd have to, we all know what happens when people declare emergencies. That's sort of in the news.
But that is the way, only you can do it.
Well,
but do it, that's all right.
I know, I got you. Thank you. Ms. Roy.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. You know, since we're discussing, I heard Dr. Paulson say he would like to retain 4 of the priorities from last year. I think that's what I would like to do too, and add 1 to replace the passage of the half-cent sales tax. I think we need to have no DRF schools as one of them. And as an additional, instead of combining it with raising the scores of the lowest quartile in ELA and math, that we make that a separate, and taking the suggestions of the community, perhaps, you know, well, raising the scores of the lowest quartile district-wide, and having it disaggregated by race, and perhaps even by, as Ms. Kortuba or Dr. Kortuba suggested, how many did we have in the very, very lowest, the first level 1, as she said. We might have to adjust the language. For example, in the last one that says develop and implement equity plan, we would continue the implementation of the equity plan, which is very robust and has been presented to us earlier and to the public. With, you know, the equity plan has goals and specific goals as to how much things have to be raised, you know, from year to year. So I would like to have those 5, the 4 from last year, and to separate the DNF schools from the lowest quartiles.
Thank you, Ms. Roy.
Thank you.
Dr. Paulson.
No, I'm sorry.
Any other comment?
Light on too.
Superintendent, did you have your light?
I did. I just wanted to draw attention to the board that our next scheduled meeting after tomorrow would not be until April 16th. And I know that part of that is that the preliminary budget would be brought to you by April 15th. So we could certainly vote on the 16th, but then obviously we would need to be after that time for Alex to bring a budget, although he's already working on it and all of that. So it's not a matter of needing that delay, but if we're going to meet those timelines, we would need to extend that for the April 15th. But that's
I would
obviously
think, and I'll address this to Assistant Superintendent Rella, when you bring a preliminary budget, the key word keyword there is preliminary. So could there be, and could there be, I'm not talking about major, but could there be a course correction after the strategic plan priorities are adopted? Is that something we can do?
So just to address that question, at this point, I mean, there's a lot of unknowns. The one thing we do know is the salary package that's going to be approved tomorrow night. There's still funding stuff to be addressed at the state level, FRS rate increases, so we're kind of in the preliminary stages anyway. So in terms of a preliminary budget, it is going to be very preliminary, just based on what is known, which is going to be the staffing level and salary. Then as we kind of go through the budget process, be much more clear in terms of insurance rates and FRS rates, the stuff that really are the drivers at this point in our budget. So yeah, I think I really don't have an issue with the April 15th. It'll just be kind of a preliminary look at it, and then as we kind of go through the process, of course, your strategic priorities are a huge piece of that. So we'll welcome that and should have plenty of time in April and May to kind of work through the budget process, which really doesn't come to a head really until July. So there's plenty of time between now and then for board input.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Certain.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've heard the history shared with us by Dr. Paulson, and I can appreciate that. I will email my priorities to you. The concern, I guess I'm a little bit confused because I've been through strategic planning exercises and all, and like where we are, my experience has been similar to what Pastor Smith has described. But be that as it may, that's not the road that we're taking. I do want to say that I met with Mr. Rella about a week ago, and I went because I wanted to kind of understand how our budgeting process related to the existing strategic plan and how funds were allocated to those initiatives. And the response I got the two don't seem to be related. We don't have a dedicated funding source. I asked him to tell me how much was budgeted towards equity, how much we had spent, since that's been a big buzz thing for us, a big initiative this past year since August. And I didn't get a dollar amount that was related to that. Like, it wasn't like it was in the current budget. So I can appreciate what Dr. Paulson is saying, that, the urgency in us completing this process and coming up with priorities to focus our work. But I don't think the funding is really tied to that. If I missed that in that conversation, Mr. Rella, I'll come back and you can show me where our existing budget ties into this legal size sheet here. If I missed that, you can correct me on that. Maybe I did miss it in the conversation, but I didn't get that from the equity. You told me there were some things being done, but I didn't see like a dollar amount. So.
Okay, Mr. Rowland.
Sure, I'd be happy to address that if you'd like to.
Okay, thank you. Please continue.
Okay, so some of the initiatives or priorities that I would like to see us work on would be accountability and transparency, and I'll email some things to Ms. Johnson along that line. In line with what Dr. Katurba shared with us shortly during her 3-minute presentation, I think it's really good. What I've heard when I visited schools from the principals and other people is, I've heard this talk of bubble kids. I heard that in a thing at Wiles at the elementary school, also a presentation about the equity thing, about the bubble kids, the 2.5. And I'm not against the 2.5ers, but I think the onesers, we can't leave them behind. We do want that lowest quartile to raise up. I think one of the priorities that I'd like to see addressed in the coming year is a disaggregated look at our lowest achievers by race, because I'm really, really concerned with the disparity, as you all know, with our African-American students, especially our young males. And I want them to get off to, as I'm sure everybody else does. That's not to say everyone else is not. But if we don't make it something that we track specifically and with laser focus and put money and resources dedicated where we can see that, which I know we have been. I don't want to get anybody get up there because I'm not saying that we haven't done that. But to really be specific in doing that, that's where my focus will be, just so you all will know. So we can get going with what will be with our budgeting and all of that. But as I said, when I met with Mr. Rella, our budgeting didn't seem to tie to this document. but maybe I missed that. So I'll circle back to him to get that clarification.
Thank you, Ms. Surden. Dr. McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me start off by saying to Dr. Coturber, Pastor Smith, and Mrs. Crosby, I certainly appreciate your comments, and I'm hoping that even though we are in an urgency state, that we certainly listen to the three persons who spoke this afternoon. I'm hoping that, which would be almost too late if we're looking at April 15th to have a vote, and then that means that we only had three citizens today to give input. And I'm sure, just based on our 2 weeks since the magnet came through and everything else that's going through, that the public, the citizens, the parents, maybe some even high schoolers, would have comments for us as well. I think that the priorities that we made on last year were significant, or the year before. However, there are some things that we need to tie up, and that's, I guess, Mrs. Johnson would have to clarify for me, because if we're doing just the priorities, when do we look at the actual action plan and the cost, well, the analysis with the budget, and when do we set where we're going to get the outcomes? How will all of this plow in together?
Sure. And as I talked about at the last board meeting, we're dealing with the long-term strategic plan, which we went over the presentation, and then the shorter-term priorities, which guide the budgeting process for the 1 year. So yes, there is some sense of urgency for the priorities, the 1-year priorities that guide the budget for this fiscal year. What the board chooses to do about the larger strategic plan, that's up to the board. And any sort of timeline, or what, as Mr. Delaney said at the last, this was one of the thoughts we had, was that you all would discuss what, if anything, you want to do with the larger strategic plan.
Well, we certainly, I think, thank you, I think we certainly need to do that, because there are some areas we can say we want not to have D and F schools, but I don't see what are we going to do about that? Or if we want to see minority students who are in middle school being taught Algebra 1 and not having to face that in 9th and 10th grade or 11th grade, then what are we going to do about it? Setting priorities is one thing, but moving the actual needle and saying specifically what we are going to do is another thing. And so when I turn my items into you, Mrs. Johnson, and before we were restricted to 5, I think, were we not, each board member? Or did you whittle it down to 5? I'm not sure.
Board members are not limited. I think, as I recall, last year when the board had a workshop, the goal was to, as a collective, the goal was to whittle it down to, 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that neighborhood. But I mean, certainly, I guess you could all present me with as many as you like, but if somebody presents me with 10, it's going to be a little, and somebody else presents me with 5, do I include all 10? I need some.
Because I'm thinking, based on all of the notes and everything I've heard for the past year and a half, it might be 10. For me, I don't know what the other board members may say, but there are a lot of strategic things that we need to include. And yes.
And you're talking about the priorities, the 1-year priorities that direct the budget.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's up to the board as a group, whether or not you want 5 strategic priorities, 10, that's up to you all.
If we do, let's say we do 5 each year or every other year, we'll never get to everything that's needed and that we are looking at. I don't
Well,
see.
And again, as Dr. Paulson pointed out, we are not ignoring everything else on the strategic plan. As you can see from the summary, we're doing a lot on everything that's on the strategic plan, not just those that are listed on not just those 5 items that are listed on the short-term strategic priorities. We're still addressing all of the other stuff on the strategic plan. But if the board chooses to go with 10 strategic priorities for this year to drive the budget, that's the board's pleasure. If they prefer to go to 5 or 8, that's entirely up to you all. Just give me a number so I know what I should come back with in April.
Whatever is needed for the students, especially, and I know safety is a major issue. I know the building of our new school and improvements of the other schools are major. I know our equity plan is major, but everything that, since we've had such a long pause with certain areas, especially in performance, and yes, we have increased graduation. Yes, we have increased CTE, and I could go down the list of what the staff gave us this afternoon. But there are so many things that the gap is so wide. And they have everything, I think, that would relate to student performance, student efficiency, student, even after students leave high school. What are we saying about them? How are we tracking them? How do we know how successful that we have been? And then I look at our strategic, the long one, with short and long-term objectives. Have we met those? What have we done underway with our equity? Have we met those goals for this year or projections? What corrective action have we taken in all of these different areas? So I'm just wondering, how can we pull all of this together in 5 priorities, but yet we have a larger realm? And I don't think we've just, thank you to the staff who brought back results today, but I don't think we have actually done any discussion of past practices.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Daly. Before I call anyone else, I'm going to weigh in a little bit. I'm going to go back to what Dr. Paulson said, in that priorities do not exclude everything else. If we're going to have priorities, it makes it a little harder when you have to limit it. And when you have to say, here is what we want to make sure the focus is on. That doesn't mean in any stretch of the imagination that all of the other goals are not important. And when we are addressing things that affect one group of students over another because there is a crying need for that problem to be addressed, that doesn't mean that we're forgetting the other students. So I just, just for me, I think it's a difficult thing. Now, on Algebra 1, Superintendent Clark, I know that we have discussed this a little bit. Could you explain some of the things, just if you don't mind, a little capsule of what we're doing for Algebra 1 to try to help some of the children that are left behind a little bit in this?
I have some, and I may have to tag in with Ms. Wise to address some of those things. A lot of the work has been centered around Algebra Nation. I mean, that was created right here in our own backyard through UF, and we were asked several years ago to pilot that as kind of one of the first districts to do so. So we've been working over the past couple of years with the consultants there, and this year, and even last year, I know that our math curriculum specialist has been working to provide, with Algebra Nation, professional development for our Algebra 1 teachers directly. So to be able to utilize that particular resource for our students. So I know that that's been a pretty heavy prioritized area in the curriculum department as for math, to really look at that, because we have looked at the Algebra 1 scores and have looked at where the students are taking it. We recognize that our middle school Algebra 1 scores, when you even disaggregate by level particularly, our middle school pass rate is very, very high because, as was mentioned, our students who are higher performing generally take Algebra 1, some in 6th grade, some in 7th, and quite a few in 8th. So we do recognize that that is a big difference in the performance rate between our students. So Ms. Wise, I don't know if you want to add anything else to what Mr. Frazier's doing with math.
Well, I will just call your attention to the update we provided you starting on page 2. We are well aware of the disparity between the way our middle school and high school students perform in Algebra 1. And Derek Frazier, among others, are working very closely with our teachers to help improve that. When we went through this recent textbook adoption, we vetted the materials very carefully to try to find something better and to find something not just for the Algebra 1 course, but for our liberal arts math, and also the same for informal geometry before they take geometry, because there's a similar situation with the geometry course as well. So we're looking at teacher training, instructional materials, instructional technology. We're expanding the training of the teachers on the TI Inspire calculators, which is a more engaging and hands-on way to both do instruction, but also to use formative assessment in real time. So for teachers teaching whole group something, a concept, to do a quick, I forget if they call it a poll or what's it called? A poll, a response. The information goes up, it'll look like a pie chart up on the screen. The teacher will know sitting at her computer exactly who needs some additional support. She can release them to go on and do some independent work and then go around or he or she and support the students. So we've expanded the use of those TI Inspire calculators for that purpose. It is very much on our radar as an issue, an area that's ripe for improvement, because the performance isn't where we need it to be.
So, Mrs. Wise, how many
if I could please continue.
This had to do with the algebra.
Well, I'll get back to you. But I wanted to point this out because I've had these conversations with the superintendent, and I want to make it clear that when there is an issue, this superintendent and this staff jumps in with both feet and tries to find solutions. They try to improve the situation for our children. So and I think that's an important point. And I knew I wasn't throwing anybody under the bus by asking these questions, because I've discussed this with the superintendent. And there is a level of fluency that you can tell, not by me, for goodness sakes, but by the superintendent and by Ms. Wise. And these are serious attempts to address deficiencies. So that was my point in asking you to do this, because I wanted the public to know it's not just, oh, here's the problem. It's, well, here's the problem. What are we going to do about it for the sake of the kids? How are we going to help teachers get their goals done? These are all things that this district is all about every single day. And since I know Dr. McNeely wants to ask an algebra, I know, but she wanted to, I think, specifically on algebra. So, but I wanted to say, for me, and things that I want to keep going on, and I don't have any argument with any of the ones carried through that haven't been fulfilled. But for me, it's lower quartile. What can we do? What are we not doing to get the results that we all want? What can we do? And also, what can we do to continue to address compensation for all employees? Because that is, it was a big news article last week about teacher shortage, and it's not just teachers, it's all employees. So Dr. McNeely, while Ms. Wise is up here, why don't you go ahead? Thank you.
Ms. Wise, for the children, the students who have not been successful, what are we doing for those kids in mathematics? Are we taking them out and putting them in a lower math system?
We have done some adjusting, Dr. McNeely, to the course sequence to try to give students more time to learn the Algebra 1 content, for instance, by offering some other courses. But Mr. Frazier is also working closely with the teachers to try to develop review materials to either use in extended learning opportunities, whether that's in the school day or in a boot camp setting on a weekend, because sometimes the students just need more time and different approaches than just the 50 minutes a day during the school year, take the exam in May. So we are working on review materials as well, but also helping the teachers get better at using the assessment results as a tool to plan instruction, which includes remediation, is something that Mr. Charbonnet and Mr. Arduzer in the research department are working in collaboration with Mr. Frazier and the teachers, because we're also trying to really identify where those gaps are. Sometimes the students are coming into the course with some serious gaps in their knowledge and trying to fill that in before we get to assessment time.
So I'm wondering, with you having to pull those students out of those core courses, and I think I have been told, and please correct me, that those students, if they are pulled out at this particular time and teachers sort of feel they're not going to be successful, then that increases graduation rate as well, right? If they are in a lower math class or whatever. I may be wrong with that.
I'm not aware of a practice where we're pulling students out of a tested course and putting them in a lower course.
So they stay in that course then?
Yes, ma'am. There's a pre-course to Algebra 1, which is liberal arts math, that they could either take before it or at the same time and double up on their math. They may be doing that, but they're not pulled out of the Algebra 1. Are you saying that it gets to this time of year and teachers are like, I don't think they're going to make it?
I like what you just said about the double.
Taking double math?
If that is the case.
That is offered in some places, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean they won't. They will all take the Algebra 1 exam. Being in the course triggers the exam.
Okay. I may have further questions for you.
Thank you, Dr. McNeely. Thank you, Ms. Wise. Dr. Paulson, thank you for being patient. Please continue.
The budget is tied to the strategic plan. Like every year, when we try to increase the salaries, if I can see how the budget is and where we can work, then we can work to get money to put into those salaries. Example, I work with the health insurance. I meet on that with that group, and I have suggestions, and we try to do that. So the salaries are tied to the strategic plan. If you make it a priority, then you look for where you can get money for it. Now, and also, we got a committee that's going to try to keep the integrity of our ASP salary schedule. And then, but at the same time, we want to make it where we get up higher and higher with our minimum wage. That committee needs to meet when they're fixing and trying to do things. It's nice to have an idea about the budget and what kind of money you get for the budget. Safety and security, that doesn't include the budget and money. We're just going to have to see what do our schools need, what do we need to put in and what maybe we're going to be able to spend. And no DRF schools, Everybody on this board, you remember Lake Forest? We put money into it. We put extra money into it because it was a priority. Now, you can have priorities and the staff, just like you said, Mr. Hyatt, the staff's still working on everything else. As we saw tonight. But, you know, as a board member, you can set priorities. I want to increase the salaries for our employees. As a board member, I want to do that. And you know something? If I do that, then we hire better people and the kids get taught better. I want to keep the kids safe. You know, if they get attacked, everything else is a moot point. We need to keep our kids safe. And no D or F schools. You know, the other schools, we need to put more money in because that's why it's tied to the budget. Because we put more money into it. We've done it in the past and we can do it again. And that's why I want to know, and that's why I'm getting involved with the budget more this year than I have in the last 2 years. And I've been involved with this budget ever since I've been on the board because that's been my livelihood for 20 years. So, what is going on, and we've done this every time, nobody is forgetting the rest of the strategic plan. Nobody is forgetting our children. Board members can make priorities that they want to see get done. We have a very competent staff that does the work we expect them to do, as you can see. They're understaffed, and I don't know how we ask them to do what we ask them to do. Now, I'm just frustrated. We go through this every time, like, we don't care about everything else the kids do. Yeah, we care about everything else. Make priorities. Make priorities. We're board members. What do we want to see done as board members? Mrs. Clark's going to take care of the rest of it for us. We have a strategic plan. If we don't have something there, come on, you make a suggestion, and we'll look at putting it in. But this round and around in a circle is what we're doing right now. That's it. I'm sorry, I'm frustrated. We're going in a circle, and we need to get our find focus. That's why you have strategic plans. You talk about doing all these strategic plans, you should talk about getting all the arrows in the same direction. That's what strategic plans do, not just all this other stuff. And I've been involved with 6 strategic plans myself. Now, can you see I'm a little frustrated?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Paulson. Dr. McNeely.
Since Dr. Paulson, I had not said my priorities because there's so many, and I'm not going to go around and around with them. I want mine considered just like I want Mrs. Roy, Ms. Certain, Mr. Hyatt, and Dr. Paulson. Not that his are so at the top, but some of the other areas are just as important. Specifically, I heard a citizen mention Head Start. I'd like for us to be known as a pre-K through 12 school district because we cannot eliminate the priority of early learners. And that's our 3, 4, and 4-year-old early learners. And I'm finding out today that our pre-K students, so many of them, that are tied into the Title I, since we stated at our retreat last week there would be no surprises ever. I'm not going to say that today, but I want that as a priority because I have not spoken to the superintendent. But I spoke with several people in Polk County today trying to figure out what can we do to save this Head Start program. We cannot afford to lose it. We cannot afford to have Lutheran or any other service come in and pick that up. We know our families, and our children deserve to be taught by our staff and teachers and not some outside agency. I'm sorry. So that would be a top priority for me. Raises, of course. I want raises so certain people in my family can get out of my pocket. We need to have raises. But I'm just going to say that I will have a list and mine are going to be extreme, and I'm hoping that the 4 other colleagues up here will pick up on those that I give to Mrs. Johnson. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Benelli. Ms. Roy, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. Just to be a little more specific than Dr. Paulson was in the way that our priorities affect the budget, okay? And Ms. Certain, I'm kind of addressing your concerns. When you have eliminate D or F schools as one of your priorities, as Dr. Paulson says, you put in extra resources. Well, that means hiring an extra teacher or having extra coaches, you know, that are an expense to the district.
I understand that, but that wasn't what was communicated to me.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, I didn't understand that you didn't, I'm sorry. Well, anyway, and then the same with raising the scores of the lowest quartile. We all want that, and as I said, I'd like to have that be one of my priorities. So all of that takes money to, you know, put the extra resources in, so it does affect the budget. Anyway, and the other thing, and I've heard one of our board, Dr. McNeely actually, say that we need to be concerned about pre-K, which we certainly are concerned about pre-K. But we are budgeted by the state for K-12. The reason we show, the ways in which we show we're concerned about pre-K is that we donate money to the passage of the Children's Trust. You know, thank God that did pass, and they are focusing on the needs of the pre-K. We are not funded to do that. We have to focus on K-12. There's just so much money. And same with post-grad. I mean, we try to prepare the students as best we can for either college or work before they leave, and then they're on their own. We can't be spending any of our money that we don't have enough of for K-12 on post-graduation. So, you know, please don't think we're unsympathetic to pre-K needs. We know they're there. I was on the hippie board for 12 years before the district took on that program. And, you know, we worked hard to address the needs of, you know, needy children. And it's a wonderful program because it not only addresses the need of the child that is targeted and is a recipient of the hippie, but the parent is getting the education to extend to the siblings. So, you know, it's not just targeted at one child, but, you know, we're one of the few districts in the state that sponsors Head Start, and we are committed to Head Start. We're going through the governance training tomorrow, but we can't allocate K-12 money for pre-K. So that's just my remarks. Thank you, Mr. Hay.
Thank you, Ms. Roy. Dr. Paulson. Okay. Do we have any other comments from board members or the superintendent?
I don't have any other comments because it seems like history is going to govern what we say, and if there's any objection to what's been historically done, there's no need. So I'm trying to figure out why the heck I even ran to even sit up here. That's all I have.
Okay. On that note.
I probably have something else to say. Mrs. Roy, for tomorrow at the governance board, we'll probably have more conversation about our youngest learners. But what I do know, if we don't have a solid foundation in our community and some other agency gets it, wonder how long will that put us even further behind with performance of students as they progress through kindergarten and first grade and second grade. We need to be trying to figure out a way to expand and have more students in Head Start than the 640 that we have. I know that we try every single day to do our best. Every morning that I wake up, I think, wow, Alachua County Public Schools. I'm excited about the work that all of us have to do. But sometimes we'll just have to expand, have more car washes, chicken dinners, and those kind of things to add more money for certain groups. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I appreciate public input today. I appreciate the staff who really outdid themselves, and they're all hoping right now, will they please be quiet so I can go home? So thank you. We are adjourned.